Hello, my name is Jariah Duff and I am a student at Western Illinois University. My project is titled Creation and Critique, the current public perceptions and reliability issues surrounding AI-generated art. Here are the contents of everything that I will be covering about my project. What scope? I tested if utilizing AI image generation models to create art resulted in a repetition of biased stylistic choices or in unique image generation. Additionally, I tested if the respective host models were able to provide unique artistic critiques of the images. I tested ChatGPT's DALL-E and Google Gemini's Nano Banana 2 models. What problem? The problem focused on the software reliability aspect of popular image generation software and models. The reliability definition that my research focused on was the probability of failure-free software operation for a specified period in a specified environment. If these software applications fail to produce the creative and diverse approaches as prompted, then they will have failed at the task at focus and therefore are not reliable for this purpose and within this specific environment. What expectations? I wanted to display whether or not popular AI image generators can create art in unique ways that will not result in one similar art style collectively. I also wanted to display whether the host models of these tools could also provide a unique critique to the produced images. The expected outcome was simply to provide more insight into the conversation of the integration between AI tools and art. What related studies? In a study titled Chatbots and Art Critique, a comparative study of chatbot and human experts in traditional Chinese painting education, these authors attempted to present standards for evaluating the depth of AI-generated art critiques, and they used empirical analysis of the art criticism. The tested chatbots were able to produce structured and relatively reliable critiques, though they consistently lacked emotional engagement and nuanced cultural interpretation. Art criticism requires interpreting artistic meaning through theory, cultural context, and historical significance, which current AI systems struggle to accomplish. These findings suggest that AI-generated chatbots require further testing and validation before being integrated into art education and should be currently used as supplementary tools rather than replacements for human instructors. Similarly, in a study titled AI-Powered Art Critique, Aesthetic and Emotional Feature Extraction and Classification, these authors compared AI-generated art critiques with human evaluations to assess AI's potential as a co-critic in the art domain. The study concluded that AI is best suited as a supportive tool, providing statistical and visual insights to assist educators and curators rather than replacing human critics. These results are similar to those of the last study. These perceptions raise questions about the reliability of AI for art criticism, suggesting that the software reliability should be evaluated not only by technical performance, but also by AI's ability to produce nuanced critiques. In another study titled Bias Against AI Art Can Enhance Perceptions of Human Creativity, these authors found that across 6 experiments, that by labeling an artwork as AI generated, it would result in significantly lower evaluations despite the artwork remaining identical across conditions. Images labeled as AI generated were perceived as less valuable, less time intensive to produce, less liked, and were less likely to be considered art to begin with. These findings suggest that improvements in AI image generation alone are unlikely to eliminate public skepticism, as acceptance depends on changing the perceptions of creativity and authenticity within artistic expression rather than in technical capability alone. Research indicates that AI-generated labels carry a negative connotation, influencing how the public perceives AI-created artwork before evaluating the work itself. And finally, in the study titled Humans versus AI, Whether and Why We Prefer Human-Created Compared to AI-Created Artwork, these authors found that participants consistently preferred AI-generated images labeled as human-created over those labeled as AI-created, even though all of the images were AI-created. This demonstrated an anti-AI bias across ratings of liking, beauty, profundity, and worth. These findings suggest that public perceptions of AI-generated art are shaped more by authorship labels rather than by the quality of the artwork itself. The success and perceived reliability of AI-generated art depends not only on technical performance, but also on public trust, which is a common theme throughout all of the studies that are related to this one. Now, the importance of public perceptions. Public perception influences the acceptance of AI-generated art. Studies consistently show that artwork labeled as AI-generated is rated less favorably, indicating that the public does directly influence the acceptance of AI-generated art. Additionally, artists play a central role in shaping public attitudes towards AI. Many artists view AI-generated art as a threat to the economic sustainability and creative value of their profession, influencing broader public discourse and acceptance of AI within the art community. Additionally, technical improvements alone are insufficient for widespread adoption. Continuing on, public trust directly affects the reliability of AI. Even technically accurate or secure AI systems may not be considered reliable if users do not trust their ability to produce meaningful artistic works or critiques. Skepticism towards AI-generated art extends to AI-based art critique. Because AI-generated artwork is often viewed as lacking in emotional depth or originality, the public may also question whether AI systems can reliably evaluate the subjective, cultural, and expressive qualities that are fundamental to art criticism. And lastly, current evidence supports AI as a supplementary tool rather than a replacement tool. What approach? What makes this research different? Instead of focusing solely on the public perception of art, this research will also focus on the actual quality and uniqueness of the images and critiques produced by AI. This study will be focusing specifically on the semantic distance and the style difference of the images produced. This study will also be focusing on how similar the textual critiques across the models become over time. This research also, again, has a focus on software reliability and how that relates to the current performance of image generation models. Methodology. Testing was based on the quality and uniqueness of images and critiques produced by the models. For the calculations of comparison, the semantic distance means how closely related are the subject matters of the images. The style difference is how different are the features and styles between the images. And for text similarity, how similar are the critiques produced based on the structure, core theme, vocabulary, and argument. As for how this study was conducted, 3 test images began with 2 screens of each model open for prompting. One screen was given a critiquing prompt and a non-critiquing prompt was given to the other screen. Exactly 6 cycles were held for each model, and all of the images and critiques were saved to the respective folders and text files. The images and critiques were then fed into the comparison codes, and graphs and tables were made respectively. The final images and text between both models were also compared just to test whether or not 2 completely different models also produce similar critiques and biased stylistic choices. Now to explain the metrics. In order to calculate the semantic distance between the images, I used the CLIP model, which utilizes the formula of cosine similarity in order to detect how similar 2 subjects within 2 different images are to each other. For calculating the style difference, I used a VGG19 model, which utilizes the formula for the Graham matrix in order to compare the style differences between 2 images. And here are the following formulas for those. The Graham matrices are then compared to measure how different the style of the generated image is from the style image. But for my research purposes, I simply compared each image to the previous image. And lastly, for calculating the similarity between critiques, I used a model from Sentence Transformers, which also uses cosine similarity. And within my code for implementing all of these comparisons, for specifically comparing the textual similarity, I converted the range from cosine similarity into a percent, just so that the comparisons would be more obvious specifically for the text. Now, as for the testing prompts, as you can see, the art critic prompt is a lot longer than the test group, which just says make this image more artistic. The art critic prompt states that you are an expert art critic, use your expert opinion to critique this piece constructively, then regenerate a better and more artistic version of the image. Now place the critique and the new piece on the same image, produce the new image, and then have the critique as a separate text. And then a follow-up prompt was given to the respective host model for what the critique was, because neither of the image generation models that I utilized were able to produce text that was not within an image format. So this is why there was an emphasis on also studying whether or not the host models were able to be reliable for this purpose. Here are the keys. For the semantic distance, if the model calculates a number that was smaller than 0.2 for the semantic distance, then that would mean that the two images have very similar content or almost same subject and scene. And the similarity goes down as the number gets bigger. Similarly, for the style difference, if that model returns a number that is smaller or equal to 0.005, then that would mean that the model indicated that the styles of the two images were identical or nearly identical. And as the numbers get bigger, that means that the style difference is getting larger, meaning the styles are getting very, very different. Now for the testing. For the first image with ChatGPT, the images stayed very semantically similar, meaning that ChatGPT did not vary from one subject to another. It stayed on task for this part. And then the style stayed somewhat different for the first three trials and then became very similar for the last three trials. For the next image, similar results were also found, that the images stayed very semantically similar, but the styles between the images, despite different prompts and 6 trials, the images stayed very stylistically similar. And for the last image, the images stayed very semantically similar. However, for the first 3 trials, the images compared were identical or nearly identical in style, but then started to vary into just being very similar. The results are as follows for Google Gemini's pictures as well. For the first image, the pictures stayed very semantically similar for the first 2 trials and then simply became similar in content with the same general category with some differences. And throughout the first 5 trials, the styles stayed somewhat different, which makes it inherently a little bit better than ChatGPT because at least these models are producing something different. But for that 6th trial, the styles became very similar to each other. And next, for the second image, almost the same results. The images stayed semantically similar throughout, not identical, but similar, and the styles stayed somewhat different. And for the final image, the pictures varied from very similar in content to just similar in content with the same general category, meaning that for this last image, this model had a bit of a back and forth time with making it either one subject matter or a completely different subject matter. And the styles began as very similar and then began to be somewhat different as the trials went on. And for some direct comparisons between DALL-E and Google Gemini's Nano Banana model, the subject matter stayed similar throughout. So the models could tell that they had similar content within the same general category. But the styles as the different images go on. For the first two images, the styles were somewhat different, except for the one flower image from the critics, which returned a very similar style. And then again, for the critics, for the cat image, which was the last image, these images were also very similar in style. So despite having two different models with the same prompt, they produced very similar styles and the same image overall. Now for the text similarity of the critiques, this is the metric for this. And as you can see, anything above 40% and up means that it was moderate similarity or higher. These are the critiques from ChatGPT. As you can see, all of these are 40% and higher, meaning that across different prompt cycles and different images, meaning that these critiques were more than moderately similar. And again, this is for the next image, again, all over 40%, meaning that these all had high similarity. And again, for the last image, all of these had at least moderately similar critiques and up. Now, when comparing the Google Gemini critiques, these percentages are lower. However, for the first image, they are all 40% and higher, meaning that all of them are at least moderately similar to each other. And the same is true for the second image. And the same can be said for the third image. All of these critiques from Google Gemini were similar to the last iteration. Now, for the final critiques, I compared ChatGPT and Google Gemini for these. I compared only the last critiques from each image. Now, as you can see, there are some that are less than 40%, meaning that those critiques were not seen as very similar. However, all of the other critiques are similar to each other, or at least moderately so. Now, what do these results tell us? These tell us that neither image generation model nor host model was successful in creating unique images or critiques. On average, the generated images displayed greater similarity than those produced in the previous iteration, despite prompting for a more artistic rendition. The expert art critic prompt did not produce substantial differences in image generation or in critique text, even when applied across two different AI models. Overall, the evaluated AI image generation tools demonstrated limited capability for producing distinctly unique outputs, suggesting that they are not sufficiently reliable for these purposes. Now, as for some limitations, I only tested two popular models. I only conducted a small amount of trials to accommodate using the free versions of the models, and I only tested 3 simple images. Utilizing the free versions of these models would probably produce different results, but that is something that can be used for further research. And the same can be said for using more complex images, more images, having more trials, and testing other popular models. As for the discussions, this study evaluated whether AI image generation tools and their host models could reliably produce unique images and meaningful critiques through a series of prompts. This study also considered the impact of public perceptions on the reliability of these tools. While the results indicate that these tools can only provide limited assistance, the integration of these tools is not likely to slow down. The best conclusion for developers of these art generation tools may be to listen to the perceptions of their tools by the public and especially by artists. The same can be said for the developers of the host models that will be conducting the critiques. These models are far from being able to substitute human input, but there may be substantial use for the purpose of support rather than replacement. Listening to not only the public but the artists would also be beneficial, as it would more than likely result in these generators being able to produce images and critiques that are not extremely similar or more than moderately similar to the previous ones. Here are my references, and thank you.